All right, welcome back, YouTube. We're gonna do something fun today. We're gonna do a QA video session, answer a question to another YouTuber. I made a Reddit post on my Reddit account, Superdad with two U's, and it caught a lot of ground on Reddit, and I got like 2,000 new subscribers, which is just really cool. And a lot of people had said, they're going to start new gardens and new food forests based on that. It was a post on just basically ecological succession, and it was on roses, but it was talking about fungal versus bacterial dominated soils and how we don't understand what we're doing sometimes, and we'll put compost under trees, for example. I didn't talk about this, but or we'll put mushroom compost in a garden to grow lettuce. Just some things like that. They're not terrible, but they just show that we don't really understand what's going on. So then I asked for questions as well, and I actually got one. And I got one here from a YouTuber called Steve Kirtsu. So I'm actually going to do you a solid, and I'm going to answer every single one of these in a video because I appreciate the comments 100%. I just woke up and I just got my coffee. And these comments are actually really good, and I thought, you know what? This is a good video, so I'm gonna answer you. I'm gonna do you a solid, and we'll go out into the garden, and I have really good answers for you, so stick around. First question. Okay, and question number two. On the topic of covering soil with wood chip mulch, one of my beds gets a thick natural carpet of dead leaves every autumn. That's awesome. I've attempted to respond to this firstly by choosing plants that naturally go in a woodland floor environment like trellis, snowdrops, and secondly, indecisively, by gathering some leaves to compost while leaving others to decompose and mulch, but I'm not convinced my approach is any good. Any thoughts on if anything is the best thing to do with this leaf fall? You are like 99% there, you're just missing one key step. And we'll go into the garden and we'll answer that as well. Okay, so to answer that second question, this is my front lawn. This is a giant maple, and I have another giant maple down there. I have a ton of leaves that fall down on this lawn, like a ton, way too much. But I actually still go out and grab leaf bags. Now what I do with these leaves is I'll just mow them. So I'll just mow them, and I will shoot them onto the garden. Now what also happens is some leaves just fall down large. So they'll fall down, fully non-shredded, and they'll just fall down into the strawberries here. Now, I don't necessarily mind that. Let me show you a picture of the strawberry. I don't mind it too much as long as it's done in small ways, because I can always kind of, as I'm checking for strawberries, I can grab some and just kind of crunch them up, and you see that you get underneath and there's still wood chips down there. So I know that it's still fairly porous down in the soil level. The problem when it happens at too great of a volume is that leaves and trees are actually giant bullies. And leaves, when you actually drop down a ton of leaves, will actually smother the ground out. And when it does that, it changes the soil chemistry in a very important way. All right, so while we answer this, sorry for my shadow. While we answer this, we actually have something interesting. Something got into this because this is my compost bin. I didn't lock it properly, so something popped it off, probably a raccoon or something, to try to get in at the compost. It had fallen over this way and it was full of water. So I don't like that. So first off, I want the compost lid back on the compost, obviously. But I also don't like standing stagnant water like that because that's mosquito breeding ground. So I put it back on top. Look what happened. And I've talked about this in other videos. So at night, snails had come to live on the underside of that compost lid. So we're going to take a small aside and talk about that. All right, so if you have slug problems in your gardens, if you're in a really wet area, that's actually a really good strategy to get them, because those snails or slugs, they will actually exist somewhere. If you put something down, like say a board, I've talked about putting a big sheet of plywood or something like that down. What happens is at night, they will actually go under there and they will find that little cool, damp space. It's perfect. It's exactly what they want. So then you can pick it up and you can basically collect them or just get rid of them. You can collect them up, you can stick them in a compost, you can feed them to fish, you can put them on a bird sacrifice altar like I do with the tomato hornworms. Get a bird feeder, put a rock in the middle, and then put the slugs on the rock. They won't go into the water, and then the birds will come and get them. So you can do stuff like that, feed your birds. Your birds are your security force in your garden. But that way you're collecting all your slugs and then using it as food and nutrient that's going to cycle back into your system. So it's a good slug, natural slug or snail solution. So look into it. You can consider doing that. All right. See, and this is why I love these questions, because sometimes you go out into your garden and you find something else that you can talk about and give it an extra lesson. So thanks for that. Okay, so this here is a leaf bag that I use for my compost, and what I want to do is show you what happens, get down to some of the other stuff that's compacted a bit more, when leaves get drop down on gardens and don't get shredded. So they will actually mat like this. Let's see if I can get this into some sun without blocking it. Okay. See how I can kind of pick this up and it all comes together? This stuff has actually decomposed and gotten so tightly knit into each other. There's no oxygen that's going to get down in. Like, I'm peeling it off in almost like paper mache layers. Now, if this isn't broken up and kind of spread around like this and made kind of loose, it will mat down like that and it will starve oxygen down into your soil. When it does that, you're going to get a bunch of pathogens. Okay, here's one of my beds on contour, and I'll show you what I do is I've shredded the leaves onto this bed. Now all these stalks are from the Jerusalem artichokes. I've left them there. They're a little ugly. I might cover this with a new layer of wood chips. But right now this is actually mulched, not with wood chips, but with shredded leaves. Very important, shredded leaves. So this is the only change that you have to do. So if you see the difference, if I can get that to focus, you can actually see how quickly this is turning into soil. Amazing, great soil, and it's mulch, but on the top layer it's basically mulch, and then the mulch layer turns into soil from the bottom up. So then the mulch layer gets kind of smaller, but it's still there. I could probably top this up, and it's kind of maybe good that I came and looked at this. I probably will go top this up. But this is shredded leaves. So this is the only change that you have to do to that. Okay, so now I'm going to go answer your first question. I did them in slightly reverse order. Number one, when you say it's a nonsense to think of plants competing for resources, and that the basis for removing weeds, which are actually doing the job, I take the point when it's trees versus daffodils or clover occupying different roles, which naturally coexist or even codepend. But if you're dealing with something that's more like for like, ground cover species versus another ground cover, aren't there some situations where competing for finite resources is actually a real thing? Removing some of the less desired plants might be a valid strategy to encourage more desired ones. This is a great example. He made a video as well, which was roughly 10 minutes long, and the first 3 minutes is on this question. Now he has St. John's wort, great plant by the way. That is an awesome plant that he's growing, and it's a little bit of a taller plant. If anyone doesn't know what St. John's wort is, go check out his video. I will actually leave a link in the description to Steve's YouTube channel. Go check out his channel. I mean, it's pretty cool. Guy just walking around filming his garden. Really neat stuff. He's got like 8 subscribers. So let's see if we can, smash that. And let's get this guy some more views. He loves plants, clearly knows plants. So it's a great channel. At the base of that plant, he's got a ground cover. I don't know what it is. It's starting to leaf out. It's got starting leaves that look kind of like a hollyhock. So I don't know what it is, but apparently it's a ground cover. It has filled the space in completely. And he's not so curious about will that strangle out the St. John's wort. More so if he were to plant another ground cover in that space, would it outcompete? And the answer is absolutely yes, it will. And that is actually not what I was talking about when I was talking about daffodils and trees, but it's a great little, it's a great point to help illustrate what we can do when two things, when one thing that we do want is growing and it's actually being actively competed out by something else. So let's go into the garden and answer that. All right, so as we walk down there, I'm going to talk about that oxygen thing in the soil because it's really super important. The line in the sand for microbiology, that is good guys versus bad guys, beneficials versus pathogens, is essentially the one question: is there oxygen in the soil? That's pretty much all you need to know. If there's oxygen in the soil, you get anaerobes. Anaerobes will make CO2, very few acids. They will just break things up. They'll make fulvic acid and humic acid, but those are very beneficial acids. Anaerobes will make methane because there's no oxygen down in there, and it will make a bunch of nasty acids. They will also tend to be stuff that feeds on the actual roots of the plants, so they will actually starve out the roots and kill the plants. So really the line in the sand is you want to get as much oxygen down to the soil. Trees are giant bullies, so when trees drop leaves down and they mat and they starve oxygen down to the soil life, they're going to start killing all the other plants because your soil is going to go anaerobic. So shred those leaves. Okay, on the way down there, maybe I'll just do a pit stop and show an update of this arbor. So I started this last fall, for anyone that doesn't know. It was basically only this one wall. And then I did this top section, and these are buried very far down, almost 3 feet down into the ground. Because I have, really cold winters. Ignore that shed, that's on my honey-do list. I've been saying I'm gonna fix that for a while too. But this, I had a bunch of like ugly cedar sticks. Like you can see now they exist here up in the roof structure or something for the grapes to kind of crawl across. But I had them leaning up and it just looked terrible. So when I cut down, sorry for spinning, hope I don't make you sick. When I cut down some of these trees to make room behind the pond, some of the stuff I had to cut down was ash trees, which I talked about in one of my videos there. And I actually used the trunk of the ash is a nice thick supporting member for across there, and I'm going to fasten it in today. And then I used the tops of the ash actually to replace those ugly sticks, and I've replaced it more with what looks like an espaliered tree. So my long-term goal is actually to get a living tree doing this, acting as a trellis for the grapes. And I have some little seedling trees in there that will grow, hopefully. But this is the idea, is I wanted to move away from this ugly, here's one remaining. It was this ugly cedar stick that I wrapped the grapes around. Normally you would prune grapes right back to the bottom, leave 2 buds. And that's if you're going to do it for commercial purposes. Maybe you do it at knee height so that you can work the grape at waist height to harvest. But I actually want this for aesthetic purposes. So I want every year the grapes to start with a established vine that's up into the canopy, and then it'll just leaf out. Be a little wilder and messier, but it will fill this in, because obviously if I prune it back low, I'm not going to have grapes climbing all over this arbor here. So I replaced those with some trees, and tell me what you think. A much nicer, more natural look, don't you think? So each one is going to have grapes growing up it. We'll show you that. So this grape here, I've left 2 full stalks. Normally you would not do that. You'd only go 1, but I'll still get grapes off this. It won't be an ideal yield, but it'll still be nice. And now it's all the way up there. So this summer it's going to be beautiful here. It's going to really fill in the tops. Still to do on this is and I really should have done it before, it's the supports. More accurately, the bracing. So these pieces here, these 45s, what these really do, you know, I have these and I'm very clearly missing this one, right? So I have to go and add those all the way down. And if you look at this side here, it's actually amazing that this thing even stayed up. It's got none of it, nothing there. So what these do is as winds hit this thing and blow it, if you picture like a square block, if something wants to blow it, it's gonna twist it this way, and those angles, this angle, so I guess I have it right here. Why am I showing you with my hands? I have it, it's physically in front of me. Okay, so this, okay, hilarious. Okay, so I actually have one here. So it goes like this, right? So when wind is pushing it this way, and this top piece goes that way, then this angle is actually going to get smaller, because this pole is going to get pushed this way and this is going to go straight sideways. So this angle goes from a 90 degree to maybe, you know, an 80 degree. So it's important to have a member here that's going to resist that in compression. These things are much stronger in compression than tension, because in tension it's basically just going to try to rip the screw out of the wood. Similarly, on these angles here, when a wind is coming from this way and wants to push this way, this pole is going to go that way, this is going to go that way. That angle is going to actually open up. So this piece here is going to be in tension, and it's going to try to have the screws ripped out of the piece of wood. This piece here will resist it, because this angle is going to get smaller and it's going to resist it in compression. So it's really important, bang, bang, all on the 45s, and bang, that these are in. You know, this is off, if you're wondering. It's because it's not actually fastened in, so I'm going to move that, cut a notch out of it, get it flush. Kind of like this here. Sorry for spinning. You'll get to look at the top of my trees. So I'm going to cut a little flat notch in there, get it sitting nice and better. Just so it's got a little natural notch in it. Ideally, I'd cut a notch out of that one too and everything, but, like, you know, I'm just kind of tossing this thing together quick. The goal for this is at the end of the season, or at the end of this thing's life, I'm actually going to have trees planted on each post everywhere, and I'm going to have espaliered trees, and I'm going to have an espaliered tree canopy with grapes growing up it. That's the idea for this. Will I ever get around to it? I don't know. But I thought it's a fun project to do. So anyways, sorry for that 2-minute aside. I hope that was somewhat interesting. See, again, thanks for asking these questions. It got me out of the house. It got me walking down and around my garden. I got a couple photos of some birds. I answered 2 new questions. I showed an update of the Arbor. Awesome. Thank you very much, Steve. Let's talk about your first question now, which is same physical level plants out competing each other. This is one of my favorite spots on the property. Giant willow. And I decided to build a river here to handle my artesian well overflow, which comes back there. So I'm capturing this water, and I built a little river system. Because of that, I actually have these invasive grasses. So these are a grass that loves to be in the water, and it's very, very invasive. I sheet mulch this whole area, but when those things come up, it's too bad. It's actually just a little too late to show you that. When these things come up, they come up like spears, like literally like a diamond punch in metalworking shop work, like a diamond punch, like just like literally a pole, a spear, and they'll punch through everything. So they punch through the sheet mulch. So yesterday in the video that you're talking about, I actually had a part where I was over here. Okay, this is perfect. I actually found one of these. So it's coming up right here. So this is basically just like a needle that'll punch through the cardboard. It turns into those big stalks. So I'm going to have that. So I'm going to chop and drop this because I don't want it taking over this bed. and I'm going to use its energy to actually feed the other soil life. And look at what we have here. Can I? Right there. Soil life. It's a little potato bug. I don't have potatoes. They'll eat some stuff. People will say, spray and kill it, right? That's fine. I don't mind. It's going to eat some stuff. Something's going to eat it. That's called an ecosystem. Okay, back to this. This here is Canadian horse, what's it called? Canadian horseweed or horse, it's not horsetail, I don't believe. I think it's called horseweed. It's basically just a random native plant. It doesn't have a whole lot of value. Some people use it medicinally for some things, but some people use everything medicinally for some things. This will essentially become kind of bush layer like. When it leaves out, it's got nice big fat leaves. It's actually going to starve light from the clover. So even though this is a little taller, these two things will actually fight a little bit. Now, I'm okay with a little bit of fighting, but at the same time, even though they're not going to compete directly in root space, they will actually compete a little bit for light. So when I say to let things grow up and, you know, nothing's going to outcompete itself, the daffodils won't outcompete the tree. That's true, the daffodils won't outcompete the tree, but the daffodils will outcompete the herbaceous layer. And the daffodils will outcompete the ground cover layer if they exist in the same space and time. But that's a good thing because that lets us do this. That lets us do this. Cut it off at ground level and use it. Use it to feed the other stuff. We can turn any plant in our ecosystem into a chop and drop soil builder. Now I have a hori, forgive the, hello, hi. I have a hori and a rice knife and a machete. So depending on the size of the thing that I want to chop and drop, I'll use the tool. Rice knife's a tiny little rice with a hook like that. It's really easy for just going behind it and slice and cutting them off. A hori is kind of like a shovel, a garden spade with a serrated edge. It's really handy for cutting apart things that are a little thicker, like this. And then a machete, obviously, if you have like, you know, thin trees that you don't want or bushes. So basically you chop and drop, and that's totally an amazing strategy for using plants that you don't want, but not disturbing the soil, where you're gonna say pull one of these up. Let's see if I can pull one. Not the best, but so you pull one of these up. I just split these roots. You're never gonna get them all. So I just split these roots. The root that I left in the ground is actually gonna become another plant. Even worse, if I till this, if I come in and till this and I split and fracture this root into a whole bunch of small little sections, I'm actually coming in to kill this plant, but I'm actually going to make more of them. So I thought I was getting rid of this. I tilled because of it. I fractured the root system and I just made 50 of them. So that's why you never want to actually till. So it'll be interesting for you to watch your garden that you just did. What I would actually suggest doing, cut that soil out, sieve it off into a wheelbarrow or something, get the soil again, put the soil back, and then plant the plant that you want back in there. And then really try not to till and turn things under. Because again, when you, like I got one here, look at this thing. If you tilled this, you would fracture this into tiny little chunks, and each one would become a new plant in about 2 or 3 months, depending on how fast that plant grows. That's what you don't want to do. And I actually kind of just did it because some of this got left back there. What you do want to do, gotta be careful I don't rip it again, is you want to do this, chop and drop. Now I would do this with a rice knife or hori. But you want to use the plant as a mine, as a nutrient pump. When I do this and I cut this, like I say in other videos, the plant's going to adjust.
excuse me, it's going to adjust and it's going to actually shed some of its roots back. It balances above ground growth to below ground growth in terms of mass, a mass balance. So it says I have way too many roots for what I have. I'm going to fix that in two ways. I'm going to grow more. This is why cutting your grass is good for it. At the same time, I'm going to shed roots underground. When it sheds those roots, it does it kind of like a cedar tree sheds lower limbs. And it'll just block off and cut the flow of nutrient and water and sap up into that leaf, from that root, and it will actually shed the roots back, and then soil microbiology will eat the roots as well. So you make food above on the surface as well as below on the surface. So you can use the plant that you don't want as a chop and drop green mulch that will release light to everything underneath it competing for it. It will now get a flush of new life. It's got a solid root system, and it's going to grow and fill even more and more and more. And you can see that this used to basically just be wild gardens, and you can see how yes, some of the other stuff's coming up, but the clover has really established its foothold on this bed, and this season it's going to spread even more and more and more. With bushes and trees, you're doing kind of the same thing. Back up at my grape trellis here, we have a guild that I planted, and I started it, well, one of the first guilds I started, and I started it with the trees, kind of the way everyone does it. They plant a tree in their grass. This wasn't even mulched before. It was just literally this apricot tree sitting in a patch of grass, not mulched whatsoever. I then added some blueberries. Let me see if I can get up there. So we got some blueberries and some blueberries, two different varieties. Now, let's just sit and think about that. You can see evidence of chopping and dropping. Right, you see all this? This was all chopped and dropped from previous season, and it's just growing into this beautiful mulch layer. Imagine I didn't like these, and these were my weed, and I just come in and I let that thing be a nutrient pump. It's like a nutrient fertilizer factory. And let's say this was the thing that I wanted to say. I choose you, Comfrey. You're my boy. I choose you. Right? It's got some stuff. I don't want to actually pull this because I want those, but it's got stuff growing right there. If I pull out the roots and I fracture them, I'm gonna propagate plants. But if I use their leaves as fertilizer and I say, you bad, I no like you, you good, you eat. That's how I can manage this system. So I turn a problem into a solution. And that's what permaculture is all about. It's about seeing your system in a different way. Stop seeing problems. Every problem is a potential solution. And while we talk, I'm going to keep this in the picture because I want myself to remember, fix that stupid thing, you idiot. I got so many things going on. But watching this again will make me actually fix it. Okay, let's talk about what happened when I did that. I planted a tree and then I added a baby bush. Well, nature wouldn't have done that, right? When we talk about this ecological succession, nature would have had a grassland, and then it would have put flowers in it, and then it would have put small little starting bushes. They would have grown up, lived and died over, a decade, putting fungal material back down, maybe even 100 years, putting fungal material back down on the ground. The fungus would have moved and changed the soil chemistry. Now, trees would have grown up through there. So we would have actually had it the opposite. We would have had an established bush, and then we would have been planting a fledgling tree. Instead, we did the opposite. We put in an established tree, and then we planted in a fledgling bush. So I know that if I just left that, and this tree got huge and shaded the soil out, everything under it is going to struggle. So if I actually want a 3D polyculture of multi-layers in that system, that I have to do a little bit of work. I could remove the tree and reset it back to that shrubland, but I kind of like this apricot tree, so I don't want to do that. So what I actually do is I prune this very thin. I prune it very, very thin so sun can still get down. I added actually a nitrogen fixing bush right here called autumn olive. Now autumn olive is very invasive, extremely invasive, and it's a rhizome spreader. I don't mind because this is in an area that I'm going to manage actively. This autumn olive is not going to stay here for very long. What I'm going to do with this autumn olive is I'm going to use this as a chop and drop. So every single year we've got these tiny little baby blueberries. I'm going to feed this bush to the other bush. So I'm going to feed the autumn olive bush to the blueberry bush. I'm controlling the way that the forest falls down, because a forest grows on a fallen forest. So I'm going to chop this down, put it down. That adds fungal material down onto the ground. It's not a lot of work. I come out here and grab some blueberries, and I literally just bring my pruners with me. I chop it and I throw it on the ground. That's it. As I do this, this is a nitrogen fixer. It's going to do the same thing as the other nitrogen fixers like clover. It's going to adjust below ground growth and above ground growth. It's going to disassociate those nitrogen nodules from the roots, and it's going to flush and feed everything underneath it. So if I just let this go and I don't manage it at all, then this tree, the apricot, it's hard to tell if I'm pointing at it, and this bush, the autumn olive, are going to leaf out. The autumn olive's got skinny little leaves. It won't really smother light out from the other stuff, but if I just let a bunch of bushes grow, it's actually going to stop the ground cover layer from growing. But it's still there. It's still got root mass. It's going to be struggling at the edges, right? It's going to be at the edge of the forest where this thing's finally getting some light. And then if I cut this and release light to the middle of my system, all of a sudden that ground level is going to thrive, and I'm putting organic matter down. This is a good example here. Now I haven't cleaned this up yet, but we've got various bushes. These are actually hydrangeas. So these are hydrangeas that are growing in a ground cover of, sorry you can't see that, a ground cover of comfrey is growing here, and these are daylilies. So these are the edible daylilies. I actually like them. So if I don't manage this at all, what happens is these get a little bit of light just to survive a little bit. They get a little bit of light to survive. They get enough. They put it back down in the roots. But when this thing blooms, it really does outcompete this other stuff. So I can come in and prune it, chop it, drop it, release some light, add organic matter to the soil, build my soil, and then these will start growing again and they'll do well again. So things do compete, but the point is that if I did just leave it, I would get a 7-layer ecosystem that photosynthesis is maximized. So even if I just left this go, then yes, if I'm just looking at this small isolated case of, say, my daylilies, then yes, my daylilies will get outcompeted by the hydrangeas. But if I'm looking at the system as a whole, and if I'm looking at the soil as a whole, my soil is actually getting more nutrients because it's getting more photosynthesis. I'm maximizing the photosynthesis in my system. So remember, we're not growing one crop. We're not focused on how can I maximize my strawberry yield. I'm focused on how can I maximize the square footage of this fruit tree guild. So that's going to be some strawberries getting outcompeted by some comfrey, but I'm using the comfrey as a soil builder. The apricot is going to outcompete some of the bushes. That's okay. They still get some light. I can release light if I want. Dropping nitrogen fixers. So I'm going to have an overall increased yield here. The soil is going to be overall bigger, but absolutely, if all I care about is blueberry yield, then I'm going to put blueberries on rows. I'm going to make sure nothing competes with the blueberries. But when I do that, I'm restricting how much energy is coming into my system. I'm restricting how much life is in my system. And I'm actually going to need to provide inputs as a human being. I'm going to have to come in and actually fertilize. I'm going to have to come in and micromanage. I'm going to have pest issues that I'm going to have to spray with. All the things that require constant human input. I just created that system when I remove the 7 layers. I'm going to maximize my blueberry photosynthesis yield, but I'm going to minimize my overall yield. So I hope that kind of gets the point of what I'm trying to do here is I'm not worried about one plant. I'm not worried about only my grapes. I'm worried about my food forest and making my food forest as strong and resilient as possible. So hopefully that answered your questions. I'll leave you with my dogs. This is going to be a long video. I thank anyone for watching. There's a ton of information in there. I thank Steve especially for asking his questions. Planted a tree at the base here. It's a tamarack of this dying tree, set up succession. So it's kind of be fun to watch that going on. So lots of stuff to enjoy over the next little while. And thanks for asking questions. We got a lot of content in there. And hopefully everyone learned something. And I'll see you on the next one. Keep asking your questions. I very much appreciate it. It got me out of the house too, walking around my land. It's a nice morning.
Question number 3. Are there any thoughts on establishing completely new soil systems on green roofs and the like? For this one here, I don't necessarily have any gardening concerns, but what I would be concerned about is the just physical load on the roof. These things can get very, very heavy, especially when they get wet, especially when they're healthy soils that have a ton of organic material that have been dropping leaves over years and years and years, creating mulch that gets eaten and turned into biological material. All this stuff will add more and more water holding capacity. So when it rains and this thing just sucks up that moisture like a sponge, like it's supposed to do, good soil will get extraordinarily heavy, very, very, very heavy. So my biggest thing with these living mulches is that I think they have to be over-designed to such an extreme point that as this thing gains weight over the years, which it will, that the roof's going to be able to hold up. Now, if we think about what happens in natural soils on the planet Earth, when leaves fall and build soil and build soil and build soil, all the other stuff sinks down. Now, it's not really sinking down because plants are putting the roots down and plants are turning that into leaves. So they're constantly taking a molecule of molybdenum and putting it up into the leaf, a molecule of selenium and putting it up in the leaf, a molecule of calcium, putting it up into the leaf, an atom of calcium. Technical. Okay, so they're taking physical stuff with mass and volume and they're putting it into their leaves and they're binding it to the cellulose walls and the cell walls of in the carbon chains and hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen chains that are inside the living organic material. So that mass is constantly being put up to the top and then dropped back down to the surface. So it's being returned and recycled, but at the same time water's falling down and it's adding nitrogen, hydrogen, and oxygen. Yes, nitrogen, because when water drops fall through a nitrogen atmosphere, they're going to actually scrub some and absorb it. And it's going to fall down and that is going to be going into plants. So it's constantly going to be adding mass. Every single rainfall is going to add mass into leaves, which then fall down onto ground, which life will fly in and eat the stuff, turn into fulvic acid, humic acid as it lives and dies. It will excrete nitrates and nitrogenous waste, which gets eaten by the soil microbiology. That turns into mass. So every year that living roof is actually going to grow in mass and it's going to grow in organic matter. Rain's going to absorb, it's going to get heavier and heavier. So that's my biggest concern. My biggest concern is, first off, you're going to need drainage in order to actually let some of the water get out. So you're going to have it tilted properly and all that sort of stuff, not kind of all blocked off where water can physically pool into some kind of, physical bucket style of like an edge or facing fascia or something. But then also that thing's going to gain mass over time. So you make sure that it is over designed to heck so that it can actually accept that. So if you just take a normal roof like the roof of my house and it was built to building code, and remember what building code is too. Building code is literally the state saying, this is the crappiest job that you can do. Like I'm gonna line up all the crappy stuff. This stuff here is kind of too crappy. You know, this is the crappiest that you can do, and we're gonna still give it a pass. That's what people build to. So that's what people design and build to. So make sure that it's, you know, it's over designed for physical load bearing capacity. So just double check like that. It has to be built for that. It's a long-winded. I'm gonna edit some of this stuff out. It was really long-winded, but good questions.
I was standing here yesterday and I just realized I just love this view, as there's a robin in there eating my pests that are starting to emerge. Really fun to watch this thing come alive. I love this view now with this cut of this swale in the backside looking over the swale. I just think it looks cool. It adds that extra layer because it used to just be a one walking path and 2 strips. Now it's kind of 3 strips, a swale connecting between it all. Yeah, love it. Can't wait till it actually grows and there's some more, you know, all the raspberries that are in this thing. It's going to be a wall of green. It's going to be beautiful this season. What's up, boys? How you doing, Maxo? Harold. Come on, guys.